I want you to think back to a time before you had ever watched Survivor. What I want you to do is just try to erase that folder in your mind, scrap all preconceived notions for just a minute, and bear with me while I talk you through a scenario. It is May 31st, 2000, and you turn on your TV to watch the new show, Survivor. And you hear a man speaking for the first time.
16 strangers forced to band together, carve out a new existence, totally accountable for their actions. They must learn to adapt or they're voted off. In the end, only one will remain and will leave the island with $1 million in cash as their reward. 39 days, 16 people, one survivor.
Who is this man speaking? This is the moment the world and 15 million people were first glued to their televisions and first introduced to Jeff Probst. As word of mouth spread, so did the show's popularity, because on August 23rd, 2000, 52 million people watched the final episode of the season, Survivor Borneo. Now, there are many people that did not have the privilege to experience Survivor for the first time in this raw state. But today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to try to put you in the shoes of those people, and I welcome you to the first episode of Survivor Retrospective. What will be a daily series looking back at all 40 seasons of Survivor, which works perfectly as season 41 airs in exactly 40 days. So as the hype for the season continues to build, sit down with me every day as we go from season 1 to season 40 of Survivor in 40 days. As a framework to go off of for this series, we'll be using the Go to Survivor YouTube, Peridiam, to add structure for this series. Specifically, we'll be using his video defining the eras of Survivor. Over the course of this 40-day retrospective adventure, you'll be hearing me discuss the various seasons of Survivor based on what era they are actually from.
Defining the eras of Survivor. There are a lot of ways you can slice this. As of making this video, I currently have 6 distinct eras written down.
First off, we have the classic era of Survivor, or the old school era. Pretty easy to understand, this is where it all started. Next up is the post-classic era of Survivor, which is defined by change, and that leads into the golden age of Survivor, which is the longest stretch of quality seasons. Then the dark age, which is widely accepted by the community as the worst stretch of seasons. This might not make sense if you are not a gamer, but I propose this era is a lot like Call of Duty Black Ops 2 Zombies, as every map in the game felt different and had its own purpose. Then we have the Renaissance era, which is widely recognized as the big moves era. And finally, the modern era, or the Fiji era, with tons of advantages. So, you gotta give credit where credit is due. I'm gonna leave a link down in the description of Peridiam's video, and with all that said, let's get into it. The goal of the series is to analyze, critique, reflect on every season of Survivor. In an effort to fairly review the season, I thought it'd only be right to look at it from 2 different perspectives. Starting with how people saw the season when it first came out, a viewer who had never experienced Survivor before and was just thrown into this new world. After we do that, we'll take a more critical modern day viewpoint at how we view the season today. Finally, with all that being said, let's get into it. Within the first few seconds of the first episode of Survivor Borneo, I think the word that most adequately describes your situation is isolation. As a blind viewer, you were probably feeling a lot of things, confusion understandably being one of those. But isolation is the word that echoes to the very core of the season, at least in the very beginning. From the opening scene, or the marooning, you get a sense that this adventure will be more about surviving on an island, and not this complex strategy game we are accustomed to 20 years later. By the exact definition of it, to maroon someone refers to leaving them trapped and isolated in an inaccessible place. We are first introduced to Jeff Probst's now famous line, 39 days, 16 people, one survivor. This one phrase universally seems to communicate with all players and fans what the core of the show and game will later develop into. At the end of the day, the idea behind Survivor is a social experiment, or the greatest strategy game in the history of television, bringing American fans from all walks of life together. It was truly the perfect formula that mixed social interaction with a competitive spirit, meaning that Survivor is a microcosm or reflection on society, and I think that is what caused the initial pop culture explosion of Survivor to occur. It was not the crazy twists or idols we see today, it wasn't speaking llama, it wasn't the strategic gameplay, it wasn't whatever this is. Quite simply, it had never been done before. We didn't know what to expect, and we wanted to come along on this adventure. Before you even finish one episode, the show has managed to communicate the complete sense of adventure that'll be the next 39 days. Just like that, you are hooked in for life. You are a Survivor superfan. Here you are introduced to aspects of the show that are now considered staples in the norm. You start to realize a new lingo with terminology that non-fans would believe to be unnecessary and irrelevant. However, you just want to learn more. The buff, which is a colored band of cloth which denotes tribal affiliation. castaways, which are the contestants in each season, reward challenges, where castaways compete for a prize, immunity challenges, where castaways compete to be safe at tribal council, confessionals, which are directional tools, where castaway usually narrates from their perspective to the audience, the jury, which is a group of recently eliminated contestants who decide the winner and the sole survivor of the season, the merge, which is the halfway point in the season where competing tribes combine as one until the end of the game, and challenges become individual, shelter, torch, tribe, tribal council, voted out, and most famously from the season Pagonging. However, we'll get to that later. Now, with every passing episode, you learn more and more about the characters still in the game, and you develop a connection with them. Looking back at it, the character development seen within Survivor Borneo is probably what made the season so successful. They were that good. And honestly, there was a character for everyone. You had Sonia Christopher, who was the cool lady who was also the first person ever voted out, the humorous Greg, who was known to make a mockery of serious situations, the big mouth Jenna Lewis, who would later return for Survivor All-Stars, Gervase, who was seen as a charmer as well as a lazy bum, American sweetheart Colleen Hasselback, Sean Kenneth with the legendary alphabet strategy, the brutally honest, truck-driving Sue Hawk, the noble, grumpy, fish-out-of-water breakout character Rudy Boesch, Kelly Wiglesworth, who was the show's first ever runner-up, and finally the notorious anti-hero first ever sole survivor Richard Hatch.
Whoever is immune has to pick between the other two people as to who goes to the jury. Each of them could 50-50 pick me.
I could have a full episode dedicated directly to Richard Hatch, as he was the individual that led the groundwork for how Survivor would be played for years to come. To put it simply, Richard Hatch was a badass. Before he was on the cast, he said to Jeff Probst, "You know you're gonna pick me, but what you don't know is that I'm gonna win. And after I win, I'm gonna be the host for next year's show." And with some of the biggest foreshadowing ever, in the very first episode, Richard Hatch calls his shot with his victory.
I'm good to go, survival-wise. People-wise, it'll be a little more challenging, but I've got the $1 million check written already. I mean, I'm the winner. And it's that kind of cocky attitude that makes people really hate your guts. So that's the kind of thing I've really got to keep under wraps.
He was truly an evil genius that had the courage to attempt the Batman's Gambit, a plan that revolves entirely around people doing exactly what you'd expect them to do. He successfully manipulated the final immunity challenge by choosing to let go and let Kelly and Rudy battle it out. Rich was hoping that Kelly would win and vote out Rudy, as Rich knew he could not beat Rudy in the end, and if he ended up winning the challenge and voting out Rudy, he would have betrayed his biggest ally. This is pure genius in showing how Richard Hatch was completely ahead of his time. For a story to feel rewarding, it needs to be able to stick its landing with a proper conclusion, and the very first season of Survivor was able to tell the perfect tale. Richard Hatch was truly a fulfilling winner, with no one more deserving out of the 16 castaways. Now, as mentioned previously, Jeff Probst is the heart and soul of your entire Survivor experience. However, do not get this mixed up with the powerful and game-changing like attitude of Jeff Probst that we are used to seeing in the modern day Survivor. This Jeff Probst is more timid, shows off those dimples with a huge smile on his face, let the castaways dictate the action, and doesn't even narrate the challenges. Overall, Survivor Borneo was a gripping, world-building, and addictive new TV show, and ultimately served as the foundation and building block for what Survivor would become over the next 20 years. You know, all the way until Advantage Get-In and the Edge of Extinction kind of stuff. And while it was a great experience at the time, Survivor Borneo was certainly not a perfect Survivor season, so we must also look at some of the bad aspects of it. Personally, I felt this season was brutally painful to get through on the rewatch. One problem with Borneo is that it has suffered from the excitement and constant go, go, go that is seen in modern day Survivor. You see, Borneo was obviously not designed to contain the same level of strategy of, you say, Survivor Game Changers. In fact, the beginning sequence in early episodes made it feel as if strategy was on the back burner, or was even non-existent for the players. The problem I see is that there was an emphasis on surviving the elements. However, there was no urgency or goal of surviving each other. If a good Survivor season for you is one with crazy idle plays, voting blocks, or blindsides, then this season is not for you. With the knowledge and skills we have today, Survivor Borneo becomes severely undermined. One thing that a lot of superfans forget today is that a large portion of the castaways on the season were against building an alliance, and saw it was unfair and broke the moral code of what Survivor was trying to become. The result of this was the entire Pagong tribe sequentially getting voted out post-merge by the Tagi tribe, for the very reason superfans had learned to coin the phrase Pagonging, which is reference to an alliance voting strategy in which members of the opposite tribe or alliance are eliminated in succession. Now, make no mistake about it, that Richard Hatch was ahead of his time with his strategy, but the fact that the opposing tribe refused to even make an alliance meant there was not much strategy needed. Richard, Kelly, Rudy, and Sue always knew who Sean was going to vote for because of his alphabet strategy, meaning they are easily able to vote out the opposing tribe. If you are completionists and have never experienced Survivor Borneo, I recommend watching it and try to appreciate it where Survivor started compared to where it is today. On my personal rewatch for making this video, I saw the season as painful, with not much structure. However, this chaos all makes sense. Survivor was trying something that had never been done before, and needed some fine tuning before it could become a masterpiece. Most of the challenges felt clunky. There was an overuse of confessionals, which came off in the storytelling as a telling not showing mentality, and there was a sense of randomness at every tribal council on who was the castaway that was going to be going home. It goes without saying that modern Survivor has had a negative impact on old Borneo. With only 2 tribes, no swaps or advantages, abundance of telling the story over showing the story, and the avoidance of forming an alliance, a glaring issue with Survivor Borneo is rewatchability. I'm gonna ask a very serious question. Have you ever thought to yourself, I am really in the mood to go back and watch Survivor Borneo? My guess is no. No, you have never said that to yourself. Revisiting Borneo with your modern day knowledge of Survivor will inhibit you from enjoying yourself with this season. But that is not the case for all seasons, as the fan favorite seasons I can always go back and enjoy. I compare Survivor Borneo to being the most perfectly prepared bowl of buttered rice. If you're hungry for Survivor, the first bite is always amazing, but it is so simple that you'll grow bored of it quick. Really, Survivor Borneo is best as a fond memory you can look back to as the beginning of something special. With all that said, let's wrap it up. Season 1 of Survivor was the crucial building block of modern Survivor. It defined the gameplay at its core and served as a basis to expand into what we know as Survivor today. For that in itself makes it a fantastic Survivor season. For its time, it was a revolutionary viewing experience which managed to hook the first wave of fans. And for the first season ever, it still somehow managed to impress me. The entire team was able to pull it off. From the opening credits to the idea as a whole, Survivor Borneo holds the greatest shift in reality TV ever. Survivor Borneo was not meant to be a David vs. Goliath, Game Changers, or even a Cagayan. Survivor Borneo was meant to have a feeling of isolation, and it was an experiment to see what would happen if you dropped 16 strangers on a desert island to fend for themselves. 20 years later, it is known as the greatest social experiment in the history of television, and with a plethora of individuals who are truly obsessed in all its greatness. And at the end of the day, we have Survivor Borneo in all its glory to thank for that. Because ranking things are fun, I'm going to make a tier list as we go through every single season. I'll be placing Survivor Borneo securely in the B tier, simply out of nostalgia, how good it is, and also knowing its flaws. And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be our first episode of Survivor Retrospective. Thank you guys so much for making it all the way through this, and I'm excited to see where the series will take us as we look back on all 40 seasons of Survivor. Next up, we have Survivor, the Australian Outback, as we'll be going through this chronological order. If you can like this video, if you enjoyed it, that would mean the world to me. Comment down below how you think I can improve this series and this format, and as always, subscribe to the channel with the bells on so you don't miss any of these retrospectives every single day.